Alright, tell you the chance. We have here the M2 MacBook Air and can it game? Well, let's find out. So this is the base model. I'm comparing it to the base model MacBook Pro M1 as well. I'll compare it to this MacBook Pro 16 on the left here. But the first things first. So this is the base model. A lot of people are concerned about the slow SSD speeds. We'll test the SSD. Let's have a look at the SSD speeds. Start her up. And 1,400 for the write. And 1,000, basically 1,500 for the read. If you get the bigger one, you're going to get around that sort of double of the speed there. Loading times, you're not going to notice the difference that much. A lot of people have mentioned that, yeah, for swap, you're going to notice the difference. Let me tell you, most people would not even notice the difference between this 1,500 and say 3,000 megabytes per second read and write for even like swap, memory swap. You wouldn't even notice. The reason I know this is because how many people have actually said, say for example, this MacBook Pro 16 on the left has a slow display? Apart from me, maybe Jared's Tech, Own Its Own, you know, no Mac person has said this is a slow display. They keep on going, oh, the MacBook Pro 16, 120 hertz, it's super smooth, the buttery. Well, no, have a look at this. This is Ghost City, right? You can tell that this is a high quality but slow pixel response. Now it is 60 hertz compared to 120 hertz. Let's have a look at the MacBook Pro 16. Now the first thing I done when I got this, I went like that and I go, holy cow, that is slow. This is a really slow display. Yes, it's 120 hertz, but it's slow. You can see the ghost in, not just here, you can see it everywhere. So the point is here, both of these aren't great for gaming. They are slow pixel response and this is 60 hertz. But don't think just because you have 120 hertz, it's great for gaming, because this is a slow display. 23 milliseconds versus, you know, gaming displays are typically 1, 3, 5 milliseconds. So conceivably, this is 20 times slower than a gaming display. Who even noticed that this was 20 times slower? So how are you going to notice an SSD that's twice as fast? Like, seriously. That being said, if you are the kind of person that can actually tell that this is 20 times slower and ghosty compared to a gaming laptop, yes, you will be able to tell that this is slower, but most people won't. I will still recommend going up the size and getting the faster SSD, of course, but I think generally most people won't notice the difference for swap, for loading games, etc. Most people can't tell, right? So we're running this benchmark Tomb Raider 1200p, so 1920 by 1200, 16 by 10 high settings. And this one here, the MacBook Pro 16, gets around 93 frames per second. The M2 MacBook Pro gets 32 frames per second. The M1 gets 22 frames per second, and Intel's 1280p gets around 22 frames per second. So it's basically the same as the M1. Now I have slammed this thing, got it as hot as I could with Cinebench, bit of Mac mining and stuff like that. So it should throttle down a little bit. One thing I have noticed is that this display, 500 nits, is not as bright as this. I know this is 1600 peak, but this is in SD mode. Even in SD mode, it's locked to 500 nits. This isn't as bright as this. I can just visually see that. And yeah, just Apple do this like, Apple have big variances in their panel brightnesses. I've measured like 500 nit Apple displays that are 440 nits, some are 550, some are bang on the 500. Like there's been a big variance, and this one doesn't seem that bright. I'm not judging it by this, like the dark scene here, but we're doing 27 frames per second. I can tell you now, it's not as fast as the MacBook Pro, the M2. It does throttle down a little bit there. Yeah. It ain't a great gaming display either, 60 hertz and it's slow response, but you don't buy these things for gaming. But it is interesting that this is faster than Intel's latest CPU. So Intel's latest GPU, the 1280p, this is much faster, 10 frames per second faster, well the M2 is, and also it's faster than the 6800U. So AMD's latest graphics on their Ultrabook parts, this is faster. So pushing 44 frames per second, of course, bliss. No sound there whatsoever. That's the good thing about this. I really love this thing. The keyboard, I will say the keyboard, it's not as good as the MacBook Pro. MacBook Pro 16 is one of the best keyboards I've ever used. This one's good. It's not that good. Yeah, we'll see what happens here. 28 frames per second. Doesn't seem to be stuttering that much. Got to say, I like the nice compact nature of this laptop. And compared to the M2, you get the touch bar, you get the better, microphone, and also you get the quick charger, right? So there are reasons to get the Pro, but I think I like this one. I don't really use the touch bar and the mics. I'll probably never use a mic anyway. So let's see, will this do the 3132 that the M2 MacBook Pro does? It's going to be very close just by looking at these speeds. But yeah, with some throttling, maybe not. So we're just getting to the end here, and let's have a look. Yeah, are we going to get 31, 32 frames per second? Okay. No. 28 frames per second, so that's throttled down. So I've had 29 before. The more you do it, and I've warmed this up, now it's 28 frames per second. So it's dropped 1 frame again. So we're talking 3 frames per second different to, say for example, the M2 MacBook Pro. So it will slow down a little bit, but you're not going to notice 1 or 2 frames. I actually have a video comparing the MacBook Pro 16 versus this M2 MacBook Pro and the M1 for Final Cut rendering. Oh, that's very surprising results there. Make sure you do subscribe for that. But anyway, there you go. It's around 3-4 frames per second slower than the MacBook Pro. So it is what it is. Catch you in the next one. Tally ho.